Good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome back here to day 2 of this year's European Space Forum. So we had a fantastic day yesterday. We had 4 really interesting panels and 3 different showcase sessions, as well as, of course, as our keynotes. Looking forward to more of that today. So welcome back, as I said, everybody. Really pleased to have you all back here with us. I think we had in total, we were just looking, we had in total more than 500 of you on the platform yesterday, which is fantastic. And we had some great interaction, great questions and input from all of you out there in the audience. And we do encourage you to once again, please be active in the chat. Please add any questions, any comments that you have for the speakers for this session that's coming up now and the rest of the day in the chat, and we will bring that across to the audience. I think the whole aim for this event is that we do want to make it as interactive as possible. So please do continue in that way and continue to add your questions and your comments into the chat. So as I said, had some really interesting discussions yesterday. Today we're moving the discussions forward. What I'm going to do is quickly run through a few bits of housekeeping, and then I will talk a little bit more about the program and what we're actually having taking place today. So first of all, I would like to once again start by thanking all of our sponsor and partner organizations for their involvement in the event. You can see the logos for all of our supporting partners and sponsors on the screen next to me here. Thank you to each and every one of you. We really do appreciate the support you provide, and without you, the event wouldn't be possible. So thank you all very much for that. Also just wanted to mention again, as I was doing yesterday, the Innovation in Space Award that we have running. So we have an award which has been launched alongside the conference this year to celebrate innovation in space, in the space sector in Europe. And we have 4 finalists who we have narrowed down from the nominees that we had. And you can see these logos on the screen next to me here. There's videos from each of those finalists which are available for you to watch in the award video area, which you can navigate to using the left of your screen. And then you can actually vote for your preferred nominee who you want to win the award using the events tab on the right-hand side of your screen and going into the voting area there. So please do make sure you watch those videos and vote for who you want to see win that award. And then we'll be announcing the winner later on today, towards the end of the day here on the main stage. So on to the proceedings for today. We're going to be starting very shortly with a first part of our 2-part session looking at enabling the safe, secure and sustainable use of outer space. First of all, we're going to be looking at space traffic management, challenges and opportunities for Europe. And then following a break, we're then going to be coming on to a second part of that session, which is going to be looking more at cybersecurity and securing space and addressing the cybersecurity issues in the space ecosystem, as you can see there. We then move on to our next round of showcase sessions. So for those of you who weren't with us yesterday, the showcase sessions are going to be 3 parallel breakout sessions that are running. Being organized by some of our partner organizations who are involved in the event. I'll be talking a little bit more about those in a second. And then after lunch, we finish with our final panel of the day, looking at the new space race, looking at new space, before we then, as I mentioned just now, come back to have the award of the European Innovation in Space Award. So lots going on. The showcase sessions today, we have 3 showcase sessions running. As I said, these will all be running in parallel, but they will be recorded. So don't worry if there's more than one that you want to see. You'll be able to watch back any of the ones that you aren't able to watch live. So the 3 we have running today are the ones here, as you can see on the screen. And I will be talking again a little bit more about those later on in the day. So lots going on once again. So I think it's time that we better get started. The first session, as I said, is going to be looking at the issue of space traffic management. And we have a fantastic panel here to talk about these issues. So I'd like to start by now welcoming to the stage our moderator for the session. So that's Nikolai Kilstov from World Economic Forum. So Nikolai, welcome. Delighted to have you with us. So Nikolai, for everyone out there, leads the space-related work at the World Economic Forum. And understand, Nikolai, the topic of space sustainability is really important to WEF. And I think we have a couple of links which we're going to be putting into the chat for the Space Industry Debris Statement, which was recently released and signed by 18 companies And that was also a driving force for a space sustainability rating, which we're also going to be putting a link to in the chat. So lots of work going on in WEF with regards to this topic and space sustainability. So really looking forward to the session, and looking forward to hearing from you and to our panelists as well. So welcome again, and over to you.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much, Dan. And really excited to help steer this important conversation today with a terrific panel of experts. And thank you very much for the kind invitation. So my name is Nikolai Hlistov, and indeed, as Dan said, I lead the World Economic Forum's work on space. We are the international organization for public-private collaboration committed to improving the state of the world. Now, as Dan mentioned, we have been working together with other actors on the topic of debris and orbital safety through the creation of an incentive mechanism, the Space Sustainability Rating. But now we're also shifting focus to the broader topic of safety and sustainability, and looking at space traffic management. We also run and manage the Global Future Council on Space, which brings together different experts on the topic. Now, first of all, a warm welcome and good morning, of course, to an afternoon to all of you and to our speakers, who I will introduce shortly. As you know, the debris and space traffic management, or coordination, as some prefer, as sometimes there are discords in the sector about how we should even call the topic, is a very broad and complex subject, but is one of the most pressing challenges for us as a sector, and one we need to urgently address, if, of course, we are to maintain our orbits in a healthy and operational form, and not only continue to enjoy the benefits that space provides to us all on Earth, but to continue to grow it and to bring in, of course, new models that we talk about in the coming years and decades. Now, most of you watching and on the panel know the approximate rough figures of debris that's out there. It's worth noting, though, that as the latest bit of news, the latest developments, for example, with FCC filings just last week that have received requests to close to 40,000 satellites from close to 10 different companies in the V-band spectrum. Now, perhaps not all these will come to pass, and some, of course, of these filings are looking at, in some cases, hundreds of satellites per constellation, while others propose constellations in the thousands, which, of course, is on top of some of the previous constellations, which we're all aware of. So how do we manage all these satellites in a seemingly vast, but, of course, limited orbital environment, particularly when we look at the low Earth orbit, LEO? And how do we ensure that these active satellites, which bring tremendous benefits to all of us, do not collide with each other or with hundreds of thousands of pieces of dangerous debris? So let's hear from our panelists, their views first. And of course, we'll try to ask them some difficult questions after that as well, and look to your questions. Do put them in the chat to put to our panelists to really have an interactive conversation. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists. Again, a terrific panel. So Christoph Kautz, Head of Unit for Secure Connectivity, Space Surveillance and Applications, Defense and Industry at European Commission. Then we have Jacob Gear, Head of Space Surveillance and Tracking at the UK Space Agency. Mark Dickinson, Deputy Chief Technology Officer and Vice President for the Space Segment at Inmarsat, as well as Executive Director for Space Data Association. Miguel Angel Molina, Strategy and Business Development Manager at GMV. And finally, of course, Arti Holamayani, Secretary General of EMEA Satellite Operator Association and a member of the Global Future Council on Space. So let's start, and let's go to you, Christoph, for your introductory remarks, please.
Very much, and good morning to everybody. I would like to make 3 points. The first one is about why STM is an important and urgent matter. The second is what we have done so far at the EU level, and the third one is what we want to do next at the EU level. So why is it an important matter? I think, okay, this has been discussed and explained many times in several fora, but I want to give you my own perspective on it. I think we have 3 interlinked developments that make it urgent to deal with STM. First of all, we have the economic aspects of space are changing. Some call it democratization of space, but definitely the cost of bringing satellites into orbit is continuously decreasing. So this means return on investment is improving, meaning that more and more people are getting interested in investing in space. And this has then, secondly, of course, led or is leading to an increase of number of satellites being launched, and you just referred to the new requests that were made to the FCC in the US. So it's a clear trend. And of course, this means an increasing space traffic activity and means higher risk of collision and means potentially an increase on the number of space debris. And at the same time, we have only very limited rules of the road, if I may call it like that. I would like to make an analogy here, perhaps with climate change, because it's quite interesting. So we have here a man-made situation for STM, like we have for climate change. We are all conscious that something needs to be done. We know that no action is the worst of all options. And at the same time, it's difficult to agree on common actions at international, at worldwide level. But I think we can perhaps, looking at this analogy, see also some differences, because I think if we act now, if we act rapidly, we can also improve the situation with regard to space debris and STM quite rapidly. Whilst for CO2 emissions, we know it will take decades and decades to improve the situation. So let me come now to my second point. What have we done so far at the EU level? And I would like to distinguish perhaps three elements. The first one is at the level of knowledge building. So we have started through the framework research program Horizon 2020 to do some work which is aimed at assessing the technologies and capacities necessary for the management of STM. At the same time, we have also, thanks to the European Parliament, started a pilot project which is looking at providing us with a comprehensive picture of existing and emerging frameworks, as well as identifying needs and market development. So that's on the, let's say, knowledge building side. Then on the operational side, we have, since several years, the SST, Space Surveillance and Tracking system in place, which provides services to EU satellite operators. And it's now a fully fledged component in its own right as part of the EU space program. So we have an operational side there. On the political level, and this is perhaps the most important, there have been now many discussions notably in the Council, under the Finnish, German, Portuguese, and now the Slovene presidency. And in May, at the Competitiveness Council, there was an orientation debate with ministers. And I think the message coming out from this political discussion is clear. It's urgent to develop a new STM approach. So I think we have all the ingredients. We have an operational capacity, we have technical knowledge, and we have a political will. So what next? So first of all, from the Commission side, we had already announced in January in a communication on synergies between civil defense and space industries that we want to do something on STM. And this is now being confirmed in September in the Commission's work program for 2022, that we will come up with a communication on an EU STM approach. Looking more into detail what that means, we think that we should work along three lines. The first one is on capacity building. In other words, how can we make the best use and further improve our SST capabilities in light of the challenges created by this increased space traffic? Second, we need to work on rules and standards. In other words, how can we foster the development of rules and standards that are fitted to this increased space traffic? And third, we need to work on the international dimension. In other words, how can we ensure that effectively we can make progress on STM in the international level, given that space is global by its nature? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Christoph. And of course, you touch on all the key elements there when we look at how to start to address it. So let's hear comments from our second panelist, Jacob. Can we go to you, please?
Hello, good morning. Thank you, Nikolai, and thank you, Christoph, that great introduction. My name's Jacob Gear. I'm the head of space surveillance and tracking here in the UK Space Agency. I've got a team of around 16 people that are monitoring orbital events for collisions, re-entries and fragmentation events. So I know very much, because they tell me, that the growing number of events they face as the amount of space traffic increases as well. So this is an important topic to be talking about now, and as the last speaker said, it's an important topic to act on rapidly. And I'll give you a bit of a background for the UK actions in this area, and then maybe talk about some of the points that we have learned from this as we've committed these actions. So the UK has quite a heritage in looking at this. For the more senior members of the audience, we were one of the co-signatories alongside Russia and America of the Outer Space Treaty back in the late 1960s. More recently, however, we were one of the co-founders of the European Union Space Surveillance and Tracking Consortium, along with about 5 other nations. We're the largest contributor to the ESA Space Safety Programme, and the European Space Agency do a fantastic job here of actually bringing new technology and systems to support space traffic management. We supported the recent European Union dialogue on space traffic management with Germany, Slovenia, Portugal and others, and we're pleased to see some of the latest announcements coming out around that. We proposed a statement by the G7 nations on space sustainability that included a mention of the need for collaboration on space traffic management and coordination. We work closely with allies across the world, including the US, France and Germany at a military level to track and monitor space events through the CSPO initiative, Combined Space Operations. And we support the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs to develop and implement the long-term sustainability guidelines. So internationally, we're trying our best as a nation to push this agenda forward as best we can. Nationally, we also have a stake in the OneWeb constellation. So you might say that we have a very real interest in ensuring space traffic management or coordination. We have a strong and vibrant academic sector, industrial sector, conducting research and development into areas of both the technical side of space traffic management, but also the economic and other side of it as well. And our national space strategy recognises space sustainability as a key goal. It's one of our key aims and ambitions to reach by 2030, to both have a safe and sustainable space environment, but also to have a vibrant industrial sector participating in debris removal, space domain awareness and in-orbit servicing. So we nationally get the rationale to act both to enhance sustainability of space for everyone, but also as a market opportunity. And that's one of the reasons that just 2 weeks ago in Dubai, we announced some new initiatives. So a new national mission to remove 2 pieces of UK debris from orbit, being studied by Astroscale, ClearSpace and potentially one other consortium at the phase A level, potentially launching by 2025. We announced our further support to ANUSA to implement those LTS long-term sustainability guidelines. And we announced a new contract for space surveillance and tracking, as we are developing our own national system, space surveillance and tracking, to warn of potential collisions in particular, in case we aren't able to reach an agreement with the European Union to continue accessing the EU SST services, which, by the way, we are very thankful for and we think is a great organisation. But we, the UK, have to have the ability to monitor and track events in orbit ourselves. So from all this, I think our key learning points are: data, information has to be shareable. It's crucial that we can share and exchange and trade information quickly and easily across national barriers, across international barriers, between industry, national governments and the wider sector, without difficulties. If we can't do that, space traffic management coordination may not work. We need to marry the political and diplomatic level, which I have the most interest in, with the technical level. And here an organisation like ESA is fantastic, as they really have that deep expertise we need to track and understand orbits. And finally, any STM system, any space traffic management or coordination system, needs to be interoperable with allies. We do not see the value in having lots of different ways of doing space traffic management all of our partners need to come together to work on the same system together, because that is the way we'll solve this problem together. That's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Jacob. And again, lots of interesting points that would love to sort of dive into and try to address. So let's hear from our next panelist. Mark, please, over to you. Mark Dickinson.
Thanks, Nikolai. Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm going to just add a few comments onto the great comments we've heard so far. For me, it's abundantly clear that the pace of innovation in space and access to capital to allow things to be launched is now far outstripping the changes in the other part of the industry to make sure that we have a safe and sustainable environment. That could be on the policy side and also on the regulatory side. The international guidelines and national licensing regimes haven't really changed much over the last couple of decades, when space was really the domain of governments, space agencies, and very large international organizations. But with the access to cheaper launch, the huge influx in private investment, and to be honest, space has become a bit cool with billionaires having lots of money to spend on doing nice rockets and launching constellations. Things have really changed. We've just seen in the last 3 years, the amount of active objects in space has doubled. So this is such a exponential growth in the current number of spacecraft, but also the predicted number of spacecraft in the future. They may have an order of magnitude more over the next decade. And how do we manage all these assets? We're seeing CubeSats being launched that actually you don't know where they are and they have no maneuverability capability. For me, that's essentially a piece of debris from day one. We really need to understand about what we're launching and how these things are going to be operated to make sure there's no risk to anyone else. Only last week, we saw the latest FCC V-band filing processing round with a total of 38,000 spacecraft being proposed for various constellations. And a couple of weeks before that, we had the government of Rwanda putting a filing to the ITU for a constellation of 327,000 spacecraft. You do the maths on that. If you have a 5-year lifetime, you have to launch 180 satellites every single day continuously, because after 5 years you've deployed your constellation and the oldest ones need to be replaced. Obviously that sort of concept isn't sustainable. There's a really big sort of fear of missing out, the FOMO effect at the moment, and that is driving a lot of decisions and investments for future systems. And we need to be careful with this. We need to be careful about what checks are performed to make sure that not just one system is sustainable, but the systems of systems is sustainable. How do you have multiple constellations working together? How do you launch through constellations? This is very much quite a detailed technical analysis. You need to make sure that any one system that's deployed can interact with all the other systems in a safe manner. Space is a global commons and it is finite, but it's sort of regulated at a national level with sort of competing commercial, national security and sustainability objectives. And as Christoph said, I think there are strong parallels with climate change. We don't particularly want to be in the situation in 10 years where we have the equivalent of a COP26 discussion about how we need to clean up space. But I agree that it's not a case of when, but it's still if. We have time to act, but we need to act very quickly. The policy and regulatory side, by its very nature, can take some time. But we really need to instill some urgency, because access to space is so important for all of humankind. And that needs to be done in a fairly distributed and sustainable manner. So this will not be solved just with one thing in isolation. Technology won't do it just by itself. Debris capture, although important, we don't want it to become like carbon capture in technology in the sense that it's going to solve all problems. I think it will be able to solve some problems, but certainly not all of them. Space surveillance is incredibly important, and we'll probably hear about that in a bit more later. But as well as just knowing where objects are now, you need to know where objects are going to be in the future. So just surveilling and just having surveillance of the current environment isn't going to tell you what maneuvers are going to happen on what spacecraft when. You need that real detailed data sharing. as Jacob mentioned, that's one of the fundamental principles to make this work. You need transparency. You need to know object sizes for radiation pressure to know how orbits will be perturbed over time. So the question is how industry can help lead this, and how at the European level we can help act. I was the chairman and still an executive director of the Space Data Association, which was a body set up now 12 years ago to try and improve what is now called space traffic management through legal frameworks with sharing of data and operational capabilities. And we've shown that you can do a lot of benefit and provide lots of meaningful services without requiring too many assets. It requires goodwill on parties and a degree of transparency. But I think it's in industry's interest to do this because I want to look after my assets, but everyone else's assets are just as important in terms of what threat they may propose or what threat they may form to any one system. This systems of systems concept is very important, and we need to make decisions based upon that. And I really encourage things like the space sustainability ratings that have come out of WAF recently as a way of establishing frameworks, rules of establishing best practice, and being able to quantify what that means for individual operators. And also behind that, we need regulators with some muscle. And sometimes we may have to say no to systems because they won't be sustainable.
Thanks so much, Mark. Okay, let's move on and let's hear from Miguel. Miguel, please.
Hi, hello, good morning. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Well, let me give you a brief introduction to my company because this will you understanding what we are doing in this area and what we are trying to develop for the future in this STM. We are we are a company, European company, working in many countries in Europe and developing activities mainly in the area of satellite control, onboard control, and also applying this for launches and robotics, and essentially also activities in the ground, developing ground capability for the satellite control and the mission control. In this sense, the company is deploying the activities in Europe and many countries, and we have been a major contributor for the activities related to the SST. During a long time, the problem has been more to deploy technology and capability to have the management of the space surveillance tracking issue. And on this, the company, on top of the 1,500 people working in the company, which is we are the sixth group in Europe for employment, then we have around 70 people working only in this domain. And then we have been developing capabilities on ground for the data management, data processing, and services. And this is something that we are doing today, particularly contributing to the SST in the institutional market, but also we are doing this in the commercial market. Today, we have several commercial telecom operators which are using our services and for which we are provided these SST services. In a certain way, we have already doing some activities connected to the traffic management. This is a starting point, and SST in particular is a starting point. Now, saying that, where we are, now we have concentrated our efforts in the deployment and the analysis for the next step, the problem connected to the traffic management. In this, what we are talking about, we're talking about the safety, the security, and the sustainability of the space of operation, which is a major topic. The intention, of course, is to define policy, laws, rules, guidelines, best practice standards that everybody needs to follow to assure the sustainability of the space domain, which is today relatively in danger. If we are not doing nothing in a short term, probably we'll start to have many problems. For this, we need to define the regulation, the coordination, and the monitoring at different levels, and of course, we need to guarantee the international cooperation. This is done if everybody is providing information among the different players, and we establish the rules needed for the data sharing, how the information will be managed, will be distributed, and will be used, and how we will operate in a common way when the problem appears. Who will be the first, for example, to execute a maneuver, or how we establish the rules for the control of different satellites from different owners. In this element, we are today working, and we believe that something that could be very important for the future are two words: autonomy and automation. We need to incorporate in the system on board, eventually on board the satellite and also on ground, capabilities for the control of the systems, and eventually in the future, in a short, medium term time, we can consider that the satellite, they will be able by themselves to control the problem, and to be able to determine if they're in a critical situation and to act according to this. On top of this, also there are new elements that appear on the table, like the active debris removal, the ADR, or the in-orbit service capabilities that, of course, need to be included in the puzzle to coordinate together all the activities together with the normal operations. Thank you.
Miguel. So let's go to our final panelists. Ardi, please, your opening remarks.
Thank you, Nikolai. It's a pleasure to be here. I actually wanted to start my opening remarks by showing a really short video from the World Economic Forum that was made by the Council on Space, in which I have the honor of participating. So if we could just show the video. Voila. So I wanted to show that video because I think it really shines a light on the different satellite services that are provided around the world and why we talk about space traffic management. Satellite services have become embedded in society in a way that most people really have no idea about. So this is not just an intellectual or a diplomatic exercise. This is very, very real. In a day without satellites, many services that we rely on for the proper and secure functioning of society would just come to a grinding halt. So for this reason, above all, ISOA members, which is 22 satellite operators, are really committed to actions to ensure the continued ability to use the space orbital resource to do good things for humankind. I think the time is right, Nikolai, to make an analogy to climate change here. We don't want to be facing environmental issues in space as we're facing on Earth right now. With climate change, we might already have gone too far, but with space, we still have an opportunity to steer the course. We have created some debris, but it's not yet at the stage that access to space is denied. It's still a case of if and not when. So if we act sensibly and in a coordinated way, we can still preserve space and continue to benefit from space-based services. Climate change is an existential threat, but we are treating the planet in a way that risks doing irreparable harm. Similarly, we're also treating space in a way that risks causing irreparable harm. And the irony of this is that, in fact, it's only satellite systems that can hope to connect the world's poorest and most isolated communities. And that also matters for survival. It matters for alleviating poverty. It matters for education, primary education, and many other things. So ISOA members really feel that time is of the essence. We cannot spend another 5 years talking about this topic. The time to act is now. And we've organized a showcase session on this topic also with the astronomers community later today. I leave my introductory remarks to that. Thank you.
Artie, well, thanks very much. So let's try to get an interactive component of our conversation, and we already see some of you putting really good questions in. I think we're seeing right now already from your comments this nexus. Is it more of a top-down or is it a bottom-up approach? We're talking about separate entities. Is there a need for one central entity, right? And if we have separate entities, of course, it's a question of a level playing field. And again, I think some of the questions are already starting to touch on that. Christoph, if I may come to you. So, of course, from the EU policy perspective, the EU SST framework represents an important step forward for Europe and EU on tracking and surveillance. But some may argue that to achieve meaningful progress, we really need global participation. Is there hope for some kind of a global agreement in the future on sharing data on all objects? And also, how would you say that the EU framework would support any global progress on this topic? And how perhaps could it operate within a broader global environment?
Okay, thank you. So first of all, let's say that with regard to EU SST, because you asked the question particularly, we are now in the good situation that with the new space program regulation, we will be in the future in the position to offer these services also to satellite operators based outside the EU. So I think this is, if you talk about sharing of data, I think you see that there it will be possible that we provide these services also outside Europe. But I think, sharing data is perhaps one thing, but I think there are other elements which are perhaps even have the same level of importance. First is we need good quality of data. Because there are some space debris that are so small that today perhaps we are not even able to detect them. And the other thing is that once you have these data, of course you need to have on the other side economic operators who are willing to use your service. Because even today we have some operators in the world that don't use SST capabilities or do conjunction analysis. So you see, it's not only about sharing data, you also have to have people using your data. And then apart from the data, I think there's the other dimension which we also at some point, or rather soon, we need to look at, is that data is one thing, but there is also the other thing which I would call rules, and there are two distinct sets of rules. There are the rules of the road, like if you take the example of traffic, because it's easy to make the comparison, we have traffic rules for cars. And we have another set of rules, which is how a car should be built to be safe. And you can make here the analogy also to satellites, for example. So here in the area of rules, I think there's a lot that still needs to be done or can be done.
Yeah, indeed. Well, you talk about quality of data and getting to understand what's out there, but also you refer to another important point is actually having all the actors follow not just the regulations that are out there, but at the very least, even best practices. And we know that that's not always the case. Well, if I may jump to Miguel to follow up on this point of data and actually knowing what's out there. So, we know that in the coming years, we will have a better understanding of the debris that's out there, right? Particularly with different radars coming online, understanding the 1 to 10 centimeters debris population, which we currently don't see very well. Now, will this better understanding and knowledge of what's out there, will it help us make more accurate decisions about maneuvers and therefore having a safer environment? Or will we just say that, look, we can squeeze more things in there. We don't have to worry about all the debris out there. And in the end, we're actually postponing dealing with the issue. What would you say, Miguel, to that?
Well, on this, for me, the point is clear. I already advanced some points. The technology is a key issue in this activity. The SST has been already in place for the as a starting point, and we have been deploying capabilities for observation using telescopes, using radar, using lasers, and this is something that is helping us to understand the problem and to better have a control of the situation. But this is not enough. The level of accuracy that we have today is not enough. It's something that we need to improve. Then we need to improve the capability on this technology for the observation, but also incorporating new elements, for example, the passive ranging activities or other elements that we can imagine, like could be the putting sensors and satellites around us that are all doing the observation of the satellite itself in a close manner. Then this will improve for sure the capability for the and the accuracy of observations, but also there is something which is a key point for what we consider is the incorporation of what I was saying before, the automation and autonomy capabilities. We need to imagine that in the future the satellite will incorporate internally capability for the observation, to identification of elements, and also to avoid eventual collisions from onboard decisions that we will have. On this, for sure, we need to help from ground. We need to expand our current elements for data processing and for data management, and for sure there is still a long way to run on this area. We cannot say that the technology is at the level that we need. This will improve the current services. We are talking today mainly about collision avoidance, re-entry, and the fragmentation services. But in the future, we can imagine that new services can appear and can be considered to improve that can be derived for the traffic management problem itself. And then for sure, it will be needed also to deploy elements that can help in the coordination, how the elements, the data will be distributed for the different players, and how they need to manage this data in a common way to guarantee that everything that we are doing is coherent. Then there is still a long run to be done.
Indeed, yeah, and I think again we come to a point of different sources of data and how do we share that? Is it not better perhaps to have fewer entities, but that look at this in depth? Well, you talk about also understanding what's out there, and I'd like to turn to Jacob and see how does UK Space Agency see the topic of sharing data? You referred to European Space Agency, of course, as well, but you also referred to your recently announced partnerships for demonstrations missions for debris removal, because it's good to know what's out there. We're going to have autonomous systems that hopefully will solve all the issues for active satellites, but you're also obviously looking forward to starting to remove some of the old pieces of debris, which is also part of the puzzle.
Yes, indeed. I mean, we see this as a crucial relationship between public and private sector. So the public sector, I think, on its own, perhaps can't keep pace with the scale of innovation in the private sector, and the private sector on its own perhaps can't close a business case for doing SST or conducting debris removal. And so actually that's why in the UK we see the advantage of trying to share some of those risks between public and private, but also bring in the best of both of our capabilities. From the public side, I think we can utilise our links internationally, our space surveillance and tracking capabilities. And on the private side, perhaps the companies like Astroscale or ClearSpace, who we're working with, are more advanced in some of the technological aspects. But we have to marry that up with the wider institutional developments here. So I mentioned the European Space Agency earlier. Some of their work on the ClearSpace initiative, in the space safety program, but also in the wider technology world, and indeed in their telecommunications program, ARTES, are really quite cutting edge. And actually we need to bring in that cutting edge technology and marry it up with the public awareness and the public knowledge, the governmental level skills here to really make a big difference. I can come back on something Miguel said. I think having new sensors, having more data, having better accurate data, more timely data is very important. But this is not a data poor problem for space that we are in. The problem is about sharing, exploiting, and utilizing that data better. either with software or new technology, but also across those international boundaries and other boundaries to really utilize that data as best we can. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Jacob. Well, I do want to turn also to Mark and come back to you, Mark. Of course, you're an industry player. You have been for a number of years. You have a lot of satellites in orbit, and you have a number still planned to go up. So you know what's at stake, of course. So you've referred to this issue of balance between sort of maximizing the value and commercial value and what we can get from satellites with this notion of sustainability. So how do we strike that right balance? You know, we hear people talk about environmental capacity as a notion for orbital regimes. What are the critical aspects here? How do we start to address it? It's a very complex topic, of course, as well, but perhaps you can sort of point us a little bit in the right direction.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's not one with a simple answer, unfortunately. Otherwise, would have found it a long time ago. But one of the things I think we're lacking is the ability to assess the systems aspect. What's the incremental risk by adding X to the system today? It's a very hard assessment to make. You can if we just take the simple case of LEOs, each individual LEO system it could be sustainable itself, but how do they interact together? How do you deploy one constellation for another constellation? How do you launch into GTO orbit, which will pass through many planes for different LEO systems? That's sort of what the aggregate risk of any incremental deployment is to the risk as a whole is a hard assessment to make. And then who's responsible for making that assessment and making the judgment? Just because nation X deploys a big system, should that impact nation Y about how it can deploy? So there's this international aspect is very important. It's not simple, but what you do, this isn't technically the physics is quite simple. It's just orbits, and we know about orbits quite well. It is about that transparency, about being able to, I'll come back again in terms of that data sharing aspect. Data sharing itself won't solve things. Data fusing, taking data from multiple different sensors from multiple different entities and bringing them together. That is what's going to help address some of this assessment in terms of what the true probability of a collision happening is, and what, if a collision does happen, what the remediation effects are, or what I think, as Christoph said, what do we have to say to an operator if you're going to deploy a system? This is the reliability the system needs to have to ensure that it's being cleaned up. For me, STM is about being able to deploy an asset in space, use it in space, and decommission it in space with zero impact on anyone else. And I think that's what when new systems are proposed, that's the mindset we should be having. Can it tick those three boxes? And from that, then I think you can safely say, yes, this system can be deployed. If there's questions about that, then I think people have to be able to push back and say, no, this aspect of the spacecraft system needs to be improved for X reason or Y reason. I've improved reliability to make sure we have less debris, it's cleaned up in a timely and quick, in a timely manner, or it has things like the ability to be actively removed. Or if you're a CubeSat, making sure that you transmit your GPS position, some simple stuff like that.
Well, Mark, allow me to just follow up. So you referred to, and some of the other speakers, about this sort of, who makes these decisions, right? And question of central authority. I mean, is it going to take essentially, and anybody else feel free to jump in, is it going to take a major collision between active satellites or an active and a big old satellite, piece of junk flying out there, to force nations to come together and say, right, we need to create either a new entity or give an extended mandate to some of the existing entities? Obviously, they're operating in this field. We've seen that in the 20th century with air traffic, of course. Mark, or anybody else? What's the next step here? Are we going to have to just wait and hold tight?
Well, I'll make one comment. I hope not. But the history of humankind that seems to how we react. If you look at the maritime law, the IMO, the body that sets up the laws for how the rules of the road on the sea, only formed after a collision, a disaster that killed 900 people. It took that for the seafaring nations of the world to say, okay, let's have some rules of the road. Let's know what the collision regulations are to make sure we can avoid this in the future. let's try and not have the same situation in space where we have a very large collision, and they are going to happen because we've seen them in the past before we act.
Yeah, not a very optimistic outlook, but probably a realistic one, Mark. RT, so if I may come to you now, and of course, ESO represents a number of industry players, and we start to see that actually some folks in industry start to call for some regulations, which is typically doesn't happen. But does that show that there is really a worry from the industry about the state of affairs in orbit? But regulations also take time, right? So maybe it would be great to hear your views on that, and also maybe understand a little bit from you. What do you see as sort of, do we need to sort of go at it from the bottom up and actually have industry put in best practices, and we've seen that over the last few years, or do we really need something coming from the top, from the policy side?
The first thing I would say is that not all industry players are the same. So most ISOA members are, responsible players. They implement best practices and standards. But I think there's two important points to make here. One is that there are many new entrants who don't follow best practices and standards. And in the case of some, it's simply because the rules were not made for systems like theirs. And so they can act as they want while still being in compliance with rules that are not there yet. But that should be. And secondly, many new players don't necessarily have the capex to make their satellites as reliable, maneuverable, and trackable as established players. So their satellites effectively act as a piece of debris from day one. All of that said, yes, industry, I would say, is still leading in terms of practical steps and actions, and also by calling for action at policy level. In practical terms, as Mark said, we have a voluntary data sharing platform in place with the Space Data Association. And despite being set up by industry, it does bring together both private and public actors. And I think the SDA shows that you can do something which is meaningful but simple relatively quickly and for not much money. But it can't scale for mega constellations without public support. It's one thing to be to plug in a company which has 5, 10, or 20 satellites into the system, but to deal with a company that has thousands of satellites is a wholly different matter. So the SDA is a stopgap until there's a public system available with the same quality of service. But at policy level, our members have come together and we've made a set of recommendations in 3 areas: space debris mitigation, space situational awareness, and remediation and disposal of space assets. And we've actually published a brochure, and I will include a link to that in the chat for participants to read. But if you're to ask, is industry doing enough? Well, industry is doing what it can, but we need proper state level governance and oversight at international level to control and manage the risks that are arising from all of this activity. It's not enough to rely on the space industry to develop and follow industry developed best practices. The space industry alone is unlikely to achieve the level of consensus you need on how and when to deal with this matter. So we are going to need some major governments and space industry stakeholders to lead on this. I know that many people, of course, are working the issue, whether it's the UN or intergovernmental groups or standards bodies, and we've seen some results. The UN LTS guidelines in 2019, other standards around recommendations for end-of-life activities and so on. But despite all of these initiatives, I think most are doing too little and just taking too long because there's opposition from stakeholders. And if it carries on like this, just as Mark said, I think that, a tragedy of the Space Commons is likely, but it's not going to be down to industry. We need real and substantive action by governments as soon as possible to establish tougher regulations and policies.
Thanks, Artie. And I think the ball is going now to the policy conversation. But maybe before we try to tackle that, Jacob, maybe a question or a comment from you, and we've seen a question come in. What is the status right now between the UK and EU with Brexit when it comes to sharing data and overall your participation and collaboration with ESA? How do we sort of look at this together? Is it part of the same puzzle?
So right now we can no longer share the raw data between the UK and the EU. So at a catalogue level, we can no longer share observations from the UK to the EU and back and forth. We can still, so UK satellite operators can still receive services from the European Commission. So that's a positive move. The EU space regulations allowing non-EU satellite operators to receive services is a good move, because it allows more people to stay safe in space. But the best case, the optimum, would be to share that raw observation data between different systems, because it's at that level that people really get informed about decision making. And I think that's when I speak to potential barriers or issues, it's that between national blocks. So the US, UK, EU, think about Russia and China as well, of course. They're not very good at perhaps sharing raw data with each other. But actually, that's what needs to happen to really make space traffic management a global system, a global solution. But diplomatically, that is hard to do. And so perhaps the things which Artie and Mark spoke about, the industry sort of starters are good. That's the right thing. We can do some things now straight away. Let's not wait to stand up a new space traffic management international organization in 20 years' time, which can do everything at once. So I think some smaller steps we can be taking now to start making this problem a bit better. That's probably what we need to do immediately, rather than to solve the whole problem straight away.
Indeed, yeah, but it does sound like, you know, most of the industry players are responsible and are abiding by the regulations, and actually probably in some cases going above and beyond. But maybe, Christoph, if I you know, put this difficult question into your court, how do we respond from the policy side? How long will it take to? And of course, there's progress. You referred to it, but it sounds like we need. It's just too complex. There's just too many actors, different types of systems. Different orbits, and on national front, there are many different actors that don't sometimes see eye to eye. How do we? And it takes only one big collision, right, to perhaps damage a certain orbit for everybody. How do we really try to push this forward from the policy standpoint?
Yes, of course, the difficult question, and also from the policy side. I mean, if you look at the EU treaty, I mean, there are some things we can do at the EU level, and perhaps other things which we can't do. But I think what is important is, first of all, that as I said, there is at the EU level a political willingness to act on an STM, and I think we have now a window of opportunity, and we will use that by lining out an EU approach to STM, and for sure we will look in this context on how we can move forward at the EU level, because I think it's important that, you know, if you want to discuss something at the international level and move forward at the international level, at least you should have a coordinated position at EU level, because otherwise you don't know what you are discussing at the international level. So this is something we will for sure move forward to foster an EU position on that. Now then, at the international level, indeed, you have a multitude of actors, and I think there's also two questions from the public probably relating to this. One is, should we create a new entity? So I'm not a fan of creating new entities, but I think, it's my personal view, we should have a closer look of which international body should deal with what aspects of STM, because we see that there are activities in ISO, there are of course activities at the UN with the UNOSA, but at the same time we also have the ITU, which comes into the picture. So I think there is really a need between policymakers to clarify which entity should deal with what aspects at the international level, because I think this is something where also we are suffering a little bit.
Yeah, well, you know, indeed, and I see here some comments and questions also in relation to the role of some of these organizations. You know, UNOSA, of course, does a number of outreach activities and works with some of the governments and national bodies that are new to the space sector, and tries to help them understand the different dynamics and the regulations. But of course, perhaps there could be more done to raise the awareness. As we look, to the next several years, what would be the next step? There is activity on the industry side. There is activity and progress on policy. We see debates and discussions at the U.S. level as well. We see some efforts at the international level. Miguel, what would you say, if I may, what would you say from your perspective? You work across the sector, you supply systems. What would be the sort of the quick wins? We're talking about the quick wins here. We don't want to wait 10, 20 years because that's probably going to be too late. From your perspective, what would be sort of your top 3 recommendations to try to start to unlock this and to have progress?
Well, probably we can go with a quick solution as soon as we are able to fix the way in which we can share the information. For me, the data management and the data distribution, plus the common tools that we need to apply for this common control and common approach between the different companies, because here we are talking about institutional components, commercial components. If we are able to, in a short way, we are able to distribute the information, to have a data sharing of the information without major restrictions, assuring the confidentiality and assuring the coherency of this information, it should be enough to start a quick activity for coordination of everything. It's true that this is not easy, and it's exactly the point where we are today. But let's try to consider, with the current technology and the current activity that we have today about coming from the SST, which could be enough to start a quick process in this way. Again, for me, the quick point here will be how we can be able to use this information in a common way without having problems, because we are looking to something we need to look, which is forbidden.
Indeed. Well, maybe a quick follow-up question. We see one of the questions coming here, Miguel. How would a private STM service sort of balance against a public and perhaps free data and free coordination mechanism? And perhaps maybe Miguel or Christoph, if you want to.
Well, I can say a very quick word. We are doing to is a complement to the public system. In fact, the source of data is the same, and we can complement with existing networks of commercial sensors, which we can complement and enrich the existing data system, let's say the database of information. But at the end, the source of information is the same. Then what we are doing in a certain way is a complement to what is the eventual public service, and we are helping the final commercial user to simplify their lives and to integrate this concept inside the operational concept. Then we are not going in parallel. The intention is to be a real complement of the existing public elements.
Christoph, any views from your end?
Well, I think I would concur with what Miguel said, that can complement the public sort of information services, if I may call it like that. I mean, it's how shall I say? It's perhaps a little bit like in other sectors as well, where you have a certain service which is provided publicly, and then there are private actors around it that complement it, or offer certain specific services which the public service does not provide for. And I mean, of course, I think one could imagine something very similar here on STM.
Indeed. Well, we're getting close to the end of this conversation, and of course, I think we're not going to have all the answers, but I think we're starting to outline some of the potential solutions. Again, I think challenges do remain. Obviously, if we're talking about sharing data, but in some cases with political processes, sometimes it can be blocked. So maybe it's something to consider, because again, data sharing seems to be one of the sort of easier aspects, perhaps in the immediate term. So maybe we'll go to sort of the last round of comments from all of you. Again, if anybody wants to put any more questions in the chat, we'll try to see if we can quickly take one. But if I would go maybe in reverse order, Artie, what would be again your sort of summary points from this discussion? What are your key takeaways? How do we go forward with all this activity?
I think, there are many leading actors. Everybody is playing a role, but we need somebody to break the pattern and take bold action soon. I think what I find a shame is that, this topic even got to the attention of the G20. And we as a space industry or as a space sector, we applauded it. We were like, look, space is finally hitting the headlines. But at the end of the day, I think geopolitics is still more important to the countries who did that. I mean, it's still about positioning and who's going to have the first system. It's just like on the terrestrial side, the race for the first 5G and 6G. In the space sector, we have this as the new space race. And that, unfortunately, is what's dominating. I think that's a great shame. And I think it's harmful.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned 6G. I've only heard about 6G recently, about 3 months ago for the first time. We don't have 5G everywhere yet, but that's the next level, of course. And again, satellites will play a key role there as well. Mark, what would be your perspective from industry? How do we continue to maintain the commercial viability, operational health of our space sector? And again, look to all the things that are coming online now. We're going to have space tourism. It's not just about satellites. We're going to have a number of space commercial stations have been announced in the last weeks. How do we bring it all together?
Yeah, I think one of the positives I've seen is the quality of conversation on this topic improve hugely in the last couple of years. It's really got people's agenda on people's agenda. As I've said, it's on the G20. We're seeing new technical capabilities, like for example with GMV and people like Leo Labs. We're seeing the EU also stepping up and spending a lot of money, EU taxpayers' money on systems. So this isn't a problem that isn't being seen, and we are having a lot of energy and money and awareness around this. So I think we're moving in the right direction. I think, as Artie said, it requires a bit of a mindset change. Someone needs to think in a slightly different way here. Someone needs to sort of lean forward and say, actually, having this information about systems, keeping it to myself is not the right way of doing it. And we need to look at the best practices and the regulations at the moment, like the 25-year rule for LEO. Is that fit for purpose now? That was designed many years ago. Why aren't we looking at that? Why don't we have new guidance which can then be implemented by the national regulators? The quality conversation is improving, but I think there's still a long way to go to actually meaningfully mitigate quite a lot of the potential risk in the future.
Jacob, what do we do with some of these outdated regulations? What is your perspective? Maybe Jacob, maybe is maybe a bit of a connectivity issue. Miguel, your view. Do we need to bring down and improve on some of these, perhaps some say outdated numbers of 25 years?
Well, what we need, I believe, we have a real problem in front of us. This is obvious, and we need to maintain and to increase the investment that we are doing today. We need to improve the system that we have in place, and we need to maintain our approach to invest from the public and the private institutions. This is clear and this is obvious. And the problem is there. We have been increasing a lot the population of satellites flying around us in the last 2 years. The situation with, for example, space is launching 16 satellites every 2 weeks. This is something that will increase in the future. Shortly, you have thousands of satellites coming from these new constellations, and then there is a real problem. Today, many operators, institutional operators, telecom operators, are already doing regularly maneuvers to avoid collisions, and this is something which is part now of their own activities, their regular activities. And then we need to help in this. We need to go faster and to keep the level of investment. This is for me a key point, and for sure to agree as soon as possible the rules that we want to apply for this. And this, I think we have two good examples. Maritime, we mentioned already, and air traffic management or the maritime traffic management could be a good examples of something that we can try to put in place quickly.
Thanks so much, Miguel. I think we're up on our time, but maybe 10 seconds, Jacob, and Christoph, I'll come to you as well. 10 seconds, your closing thoughts, Jacob.
I think the idea of a public awareness campaign of the importance of space and therefore the risk of space debris is what we need to get the public aware. And when the public is aware, the politicians become aware. So I think that idea from the audience is something that we're thinking about in the UK and would help all of us immensely as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Christoph, your closing thoughts.
Just to say that I would see let's say the whole subject is going into the right direction. I would support the more positive trend that Mark is seeing. And I think it's better that many are doing something that nobody is doing something, even if that many means that it's perhaps sometimes a little bit at this stage messy. But I think with time this will clarify and we are moving into the right direction. But definitely it's an urgent issue.
Yeah, indeed. Well, let's wrap up on this. A great conversation touched on, I think, probably all the key angles here. We need to share data. We need to abide by best practices, no matter how new of an actor we are. And we need to have interoperability between systems and continued international efforts. So question is, for us all, will we manage to put all this in place and continue on the growth trajectory that the space sector is? Thanks very much again to all the panelists, and over to you, Dan. Thanks very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Nikolai, and a great question to end on there, which I guess shows that the discussions are going to continue, and yeah, lots more to talk about. But that was a really interesting panel. So, Nikolai, thank you so much for moderating that panel. Thank you to all of our panelists for all of your insights as well, and of course thank you again to everyone out there in the audience for all of the questions and things that we received as well. So yeah, really interesting panel and a great way to start the second day, so thank you very much, everyone. So we are now continuing. We're going to be moving on to the second part of our first session, looking at the safe, secure and sustainable use of space. And we're going to be moving on to look at cybersecurity. So the next session we have is in about 20 minutes time here on the main stage. And as I said, it's going to be looking at that security issue. So please make sure you're back here at 20 to the hour, 20 to 11 in Brussels time. But you do have a short break now. So in the break, we invite you to maybe go and check out the exhibition stands. As I was talking about at the start of the day, to go and check out the videos from our finalists who are involved in the Innovation in Space Award. You can find all of those and the exhibition stands in the area award video and expo at the bottom left-hand side of your menu bar. And then, as I said, please be back here at 20 to the hour for the start of our next session. Thank you to Nikolai again. Thank you to all of our panelists, and we'll see you back here shortly for that next session. Thanks.